We have a half hour, basically, because we want to give people at least a little bit of a break before the art crawl starts at 5 o'clock. I know many of you want to go and appreciate that. But what we wanted to do in the last hour is just open it up for commentary, questions to the people who presented, or anybody across the table, whatever it might be, around this idea of the future imaginary and sort of the role that it might play within the Indigenous community, or about the work that we're proposing to do, and about work that you're doing that touches on that. So this is sort of like an open space to sort of engage a bit, shortly anyways, with what's come up today. And actually, I'll get you to, I actually wanted to start it off by, I was just wondering, Cheryl, some of what she was talking about, the multisensory kind of, sort of looking at the multisensory, the return of the multisensory maybe. I was wondering if you had a little bit to comment about the work you're doing with my colleague, Chris Salter, on where he's looking at, he's coming at it, what I would say, from a very Western sort of space and sort of theoretical history. But he's brought you in, as well as a couple of other of our Indigenous artists, to sort of participate in that.
Yeah, so that was a very evocative part of your talk, Jolene, which all of it was incredible. But it made me think about the notion that, this notion of this sort of synesthetic notion that I think in our worldviews isn't parsed out. We don't parse out smell and taste and touch. It's a multisensory kind of experience. And that's part of the work that I'm working on with Chris Salter and an anthropologist named David Howes, both non-Indigenous, along with a non-Indigenous anthropologist named Jennifer Biddle, who you might know, from Australia. And then there's 4 artists involved. That's David Garneau, myself, Ree, and Brenda Croft. And it's called sensory entanglements, and so what we're looking at doing is creating some new work that's a way for these Western anthropologists and technologists to kind of try and make sense of some of the dendrites, that we experience just on a very intuitive and regular basis. And it's part of a larger work that the non-Indigenous anthropologist David Howes is doing in Breaking the Archive, which I think is kind of an interesting notion of he wants to be there in aid of, let's take down this archive that we've created that has created all these silos, that makes work not connected. I think that's as much as I can say at this point of the day.
Thank you.
Andre?
Yes, thank you for this extraordinary topo. It goes very deep and it's very challenging. But one of the comments I have is about the notion of appropriation. Because the modernity is not only the discovering of the America. This is the contact with the people of the America and the cultures of America. And this changed the world that discovered us at this time. And somehow all the movement that followed in the Western culture is also connected to our cultures because we have influence. It's interesting how it is really pushed away in the speech of today. When you go to Italy and they say that the polenta with tomato sauce is an Italian dish, this is an Indian dish. So you can see how this is repel our influence, and somehow we have, I think, the same estrangement within, and it can be seen with the technology and cinema before, because there is something that comes from us in there, but we feel that alienation because it has been twisted, it has been reinterpreted in another mindset. And I think when we say creativity certainly is important, but I think creativity with vision, because the artist has to be the one. This is the point of decolonization in my own point of view. The artist is the one that can take back what is our and reinterpret this with the tools we have, somehow help to make it happen.
You remind me of an earlier piece of work that I did, where most of the, as I was interviewing women that were doing, we were in all different communities, and a large percentage of them talked about how they had a dream or a vision, and that's what inspired the piece. So I just wanted to mention that, this idea of the artist in the West as someone that is ahead of the rest of society, I think is something that we haven't really kind of named for ourselves, and the linkage between what we think these visionary thoughts are in relationship to what we're making isn't something that we've, I think, updated. But I appreciate your comment about appropriation. Ellen?
Oh, thank you very much for your talk. And I think I agree with Andre. It goes very deep, and I'm always inspired by what you have to say. One of the things I think is really important is how do we address overcoming genocide? How do we protect our own people's traditional knowledge without commodifying it, but yet bringing it to the youth who use it? It's just like, how do we use the language? How do we transfer that knowledge to them in a way that they can understand but not abuse? And I think as artists, well, not everybody, but there are some artists that think that they can use anything. And I don't know if people here are familiar with ownership, control, access, and possession, which the National Aboriginal Health Organization came up with. And I thought about that with the lady that presented before you. Intellectual property rights. Once you put something on the web, it's no longer belongs to anybody. Doesn't even belong to you. And so the discussion of how do we approach this traditional knowledge, how do we approach things that our ancestors knew? How do we acknowledge that they were scientists before Columbus arrived here, that they understood things at a molecular level? And it's how do we get that back? Like this is something like the DNA that's in trees is in us, the DNA that's in the stars is in us, and it's having that cosmology and understanding it and bringing it to the community, because the communities are suffering. I mean, this is a wonderful discussion we're having, but a lot of our community members are just getting by. So how do we bring this? And I think this is a really nice tool. It's an interesting tool. But how do we get it to them? And it's how do we make it interesting to them? How do we get past the cigarette wars? How do we get past the despots in our band councils? How do we get to the point where we are actually revitalizing and coming back with those institutions that were devastated by genocide? Like it goes really beyond just creativity. And I liked when you said, you're going to bring in people who are not artists, people who are involved in healing, who are involved as counselors for drug and rehabilitation, who are involved in counseling women who are suffering violence, who have, these are all the things that we are thinking about as artists, and we bring with us. And I think it's a really interesting idea of having a holistic perspective on who's going to be involved. And I really love this thing about, the wampums just reflecting and embodying those senses and that part of, like, all our relations.
Yeah.
It doesn't just mean like, oh yeah, once upon a time. It means now, and it's connecting that at a very molecular level. So I thank you.
Archer?
I'd like to echo the appreciation for your really inspiring and profound talk, Jolene. It's been such a long time since I've heard you speak, and it's really beautiful to see how you're. I think the last time I heard you speak was it feels like 20 years ago, but I'm sure it wasn't that long. But you know what I mean? Like it seems like a very long time, and it's amazing to see how specific your point of view has become, and I feel like it was a real honor to hear what you had to say. I would challenge you in one place where at one point you said, I'm sure we're all aware of the work of blah, 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 and I thought, oh, this is where they start talking in a language I don't understand anymore, and I wasn't familiar with that person's work, so I just set it aside and made a note to Brian, can I have a doubt of what she's talking about, so I can review it later. Because not all, and I think Ellen, this actually speaks to what you're, because I think the points you're raising are critical. And I think we all, as Aboriginal people first, and artists second, feel them really sharply, which is, okay, I'm doing all this fun stuff in Toronto, and I'm building all this cool, I'm building all these cool whirly gigs, and I get to take them to Imaginative, and they lift off, and everybody goes, ooh, Archie built a whirly gig, look at it go! And my family back home are suffering under a bunch of despots in the Tribal Council, some of whom are named Pachawas, right, which is a source of ongoing angst in my personal life. But these are realities, and these are the things we face, and the brown-skinned oppressors who we so despise are our relatives and are our community members, and those things are real. And I think the answer really lies within what we see is that more and more as I come to these things, I see people whose work is more and more being it's that process of osmosis. And the work is penetrating deeper and deeper into Indian country all the time. We used to have these conversations, and it just seemed pointless to talk about making digital art when you couldn't get a phone signal an hour out of Saskatoon. Like my mom just moved back to the res 3 months ago. My mother, who's almost 80 years old, she lived there for a month and she moved to PA, Prince Albert. And I said, why did you move? And she said, I couldn't get internet. So, these are struggles that we're all facing, right? But the fact is, all the kids have mobile phones. You can actually get a signal now on the res if you stand in a certain spot. So the truth is that I think it's a fact that we do not, that more and more, what I see less and less are people kowtowing to these completely alien, invasive Western structures and paradigms of thought where we as artists are somehow separate or different than. More and more I see that we are weaved into the community, and to me that's the answer.
So Beth and then Cheryl.
Yeah, thank you. That was very meaningful to hear, especially as somebody who's been involved in the game industry for so long, and it's very difficult. You cannot even talk about games as art, and where I am coming from in my own work is games from dreams, and it's just not even a place I can begin to go and be safe. So I appreciate so much your voice. That was very inspiring. And then to follow up, I should have mentioned in my talk, and what I usually say about the gift of food, the board game that was at the very beginning. It came to the point where the community decided it was so good at what it did, passing on knowledge about traditional foods, medicines, plants, the land, the different ecosystems and how they relate to one another, that it was actually not safe to put it out on shelves. So it is only played within the community. I only have one physical copy, which I actually lost in the fire, so I actually don't even have the game myself anymore. But it is held only by the community and only played within the community. So I think it's important, and what I try to do in my work are have discussions and open discussions about what is appropriate to share and what is not appropriate to share. And for each work, there's some understanding of what can be said. So for that game, I can talk about the mechanics, I can talk about the game design, and the community wants other communities to make these games, so that's why they want to encourage presentations or academic publications about the structure of both how it was made, but also how you play the game. But the content itself, the foods, the language, all of those different aspects, there are no screenshots of that can be shared. That cannot be put in text and writing. So that was the way we decided that it could be shared, but then also be kept safe, so.
Thanks. I want to just follow off of what Ellen was talking about with regards to access, and maybe as a challenge to absolutely everyone in the room, and also with regards to your initiative, which is so visionary. But the challenge would be is I work in prisons. I have a project, generative music project I've been doing since 2008, and prisons in Canada have libraries, and they also have literacy units. And I think if you wanted to access people, and the joke is a very captive audience, but really it's a really amazing way to be able to provide content to many of our relatives. As you know, Canadian prisons are about 47% of our population, and we're 6% of the Canadian population. So our population is inside prisons. So it's just a way, if you make a CD, a DVD, a book, anything, please just look on the Corrections Canada website. They list all the addresses, they all have libraries. You can get a lot of content inside.
Okay, Joseph?
Yeah, I think the medium, for communicating with people locally, like at the community level, is somewhat indirect, like language. We're always indirect communicating our way of doing things. Because eventually the word will get down, but it has to come through. Like you're kind of like the intermediary for that community. I've seen that, I've heard that before, where people like myself, the old people say, yeah, you can walk two paths. So you're the one that's going to speak for us on our behalf, because you have the language of this technology, digital media. So that I don't think there's a problem there. Maybe if your best connection would probably be the sweat lodge or the pipe ceremony, for an example. You need that kind of tower. You need that kind of a
Reception,
transmitter. Yeah. So that's all I wanted to say. I really appreciate what's happening. I think you're delving into areas that are maybe on the edge of sacredness as we consider them. But be sure to follow proper protocol, and you'll be fine. Go to the lodges, go to the pipe ceremonies, go to the sun dances. Just stick close to the elders. I think you'll be okay. We've always done that, Cheryl and I, all along with the projects, and that's really helped us a lot along the way. Thank you.
So, Archer?
Just a footnote, when we're thinking about what this is and the future imaginary and why we're here, I reviewed all the essays in Coded Territories this morning to kind of put me in the space for this, and the one phrase that really leapt out at me, and I'm sorry I can't remember whose it was, sacred technologies, which is going back to what you're talking about.
What's Coded Territories?
What's that?
What's Coded Territories?
Sorry, Coded Territories, it was a publication by Imagine Native, and who else?
University of Alberta.
Thank you.
Ryerson.
University of
Ryerson, sorry.
And published by University of Calgary.
Sorry.
Thank you. Essays written by myself, Cheryl, Jason, Stephen, who am I missing? Help me.
Jackson
Candace Hopkins. Stephen Foster.
Steve Loft.
And Steve Loft, thank you. And Doina, who is one of the organizers of the project. So, sacred technologies was the phrase that popped into my head for this. So here's the sentence that came out of when I was thinking of what we were talking at the very beginning. We are in an interstitial period where we are building, creating, conceptualizing, realizing structures that have existed in the past and are facsimiles or prototypes of structures that will exist in the future. That's what we're doing here.
Right, that's good. Yeah, and one of the things that sort of excites me is that touches on your talk and what Ellen said, I think, is there's this kind of weird double movement, I'm not quite sure how to describe it, movement and tension, where part of what we're interested in is, training, particularly our youth, to become deeply fluent in this technology, right? So that they can come out, not just so they can be fluent in the technology, but so they can come out the other side with the ability to make to create their own technology, like to conceive of technology in their terms, and maybe in the terms of the people. It's very tricky, right? Because the formation is all very much dictated by a Cartesian sort of approach to sort of hardware and software, mind and body, etc. But there's a lot of power there as well, as you know, as evidenced by the world we live in. And so part of the interesting thing is to figure out how to get it to the point where we're not just bending that technology to our purposes, but we're actually creating new forms of technology, right, that better reflect the ways that we want to engage in the world, and we want to engage with each other. Jarius?
One point to kind of follow from that, and also to Jolene too, I just really want to say thank you so much for your presentation. It touched on a lot of things that I've been thinking about, and in particular, one of the things that I really appreciated that you raised is this idea of the absence of a broader cultural critique around this. And like to Jason's point, thinking about what kind of structures we create that out of our own understandings of the world and our place within it, rather than building on top of a given set of structures that are not of our own making. And I feel like maybe disproportionately, particularly right now in the moment that we're in, there's an overinvestment in creating indigenized versions of the digital in whatever form, rather than thinking about the kind of, particularly as Jolene spoke, I think so eloquently and so deeply about if you recast the notion of binary code as something originary to, or at least found in, indigenous thought and an indigenous understanding of the world and an ability to perceive into the world and through and with the world at that level, then the West fitting into an indigenous understanding in terms of what we build becomes a completely different articulation, rather than the inversion that we normally experience, which is trying to fit the indigenous into the given parameters established by particularly the way the West has structured our participation in technology. And I think like at this point we have that kind of opportunity to kind of disrupt that, and also to do that. I feel like this is maybe the obligation or the responsibility that I feel working in this world, which is to do the work of that critique, so that we don't blindly buy into the very utopian narrative established by most technologists, which presume not only a linear ordering of time, but also that inevitably our participation in the given system is what makes all of it better, rather than questioning that structuring logic and code that we're then building on top of. And I feel like maybe that's the opportunity for us here, is also to think about if we build it from, whatever the metaphor is, if we build it from that up, from our understandings up, we produce a different establishing kind of code within which to work, rather than trying to do it the other way around.
I just want to give a really quick analogous point and then turn it back over to Lynn. So part of the reason why this is the symposium is called the Future Imaginary, not the Indigenous Future Imaginary, is because we want to say, look, we're discussing the future, and we invite other people to come in and discuss the future with us, but we're not a little subset of the future over here, right? And so, you know, maybe in 7 years, this becomes the place where other people come and talk about the future imaginary from their community's perspective, non-Indigenous perspective, instead of, like you said, sort of like trying to fit in to some pre-existing conversation.
I think my comment kind of dovetails with both your thoughts, because something that I think about all the time is, in the 20th century, we embraced the notion of homogeneity in conjunction with heterogeneity. And, you know, it comes in a sort of formation when, for a period of time in the field of anthropology, people were actually looking at this notion of discrete worldviews. And that idea, of course, has been since, you know, sort of set aside, you know, because this idea that, you know, everything is everything, that we're all in each other's world in such a way that we can't actually have distinct or discrete spaces. And I would like to actually have more conversation about that, because I think that that's exactly what we're saying, that around the table here there are probably 10 different epistemines, of which there are maybe, you know, we have an ontology that maybe is similar to each other's, but it's distinctly different than perhaps a Christian, or some people would maybe push back and then say a Judeo-Christian, maybe Muslim ontology. And in the world today, it's actually not very politic to actually kind of like frame things in this way or talk about things in this way. And so our distinctness which I think Agamben described as, of course, this, people talked about it in this coded theoretical language, a state of exception, etc. We never, really get the opportunity to kind of like declare our posts, and so it leaves it kind of like it leaves, I think, us in this kind of like really destabilized space. And this is where this sort of like question of what is our presence then in relationship to this larger construct of nation, these other superstructures, the ongoing formulation of the financial, the corporate space, etc. So, these are real structures in the world that are in constant state of movement, and we're trying to like understand our place in relationship to it without ever really kind of, being able to like firmly mark it, because we're always in this state of defense. And so, I think that this is really difficult and complex, but I appreciate just the space here to actually be able to consider some of these ideas, because the other thing I want to say is that whether we want to acknowledge this or not, the world lives here now. This is the world. And that, we have to have a purchase in this in order to understand how we fit. We just can't disconnect from it. And so, I don't know, just to get back to Ellen's point about the ethics of what knowledge is then brought forward, one of the things I think about is that if there weren't the power imbalance, and if our knowledge wasn't appropriated to be used against us, which has been the model that we've lived with for a long time, this kind of knowledge would actually make the world a better place. It brought us this far even under the forces of genocide. And so there's power in these structures. But because this knowledge, and in particular people, of course, for a long time have been really racing towards the biological knowledge, the plant knowledge, the healing knowledge, etc. That's like the biggest race right now. And it's, not a news story. It's like the commoditization of that knowledge is the objective. It isn't healing, right? And so just something like that. But part of the problematic of this, and this really comes from my academic and intellectual mentor, John Mohawk, who actually wrote The Basic Cults of Consciousness, what he points out is that for most of us, vast amounts of this stuff was written down in that salvage period of anthropology in the late 1900s, early 20th century. And so it's there. And it's interesting because I see that people that want to, artists, makers that want to participate in a kind of extraction of knowledge kind of practice, you can see their mining of the archive in a particular way. And that, coupled with people trying to understand the language, seems to be the new hyper formula for kind of positioning oneself as both an authority and at the same time the extraction of this knowledge. And so, it's happening, it's present. What are the ethics of it? I think all of this is, part of the discussion.
So, we're out of time. It's 4:30. And do you want to go first? Do you want me to? Do you want to end? Or you want to take care? Okay, so I just want to.
I usually talk a lot more. I'm a little under the weather today. I'm going to let my better half do a little bit more of the work today.
That was on videotape.
Vincent, thank you.
To show it to the kids. So I'm very happy. This has accomplished what we were hoping it would accomplish, was to get a conversation started, right? That we think is an incredibly rich conversation with many veins, to follow and to continue discussing and to work on and things like that. I wanted to say that please make sure if you're, because there's some people who came in, please make sure that you send us your contact information. We're putting together a list of people who are interested in this stuff. We'll have information up on the website. The website's www.abtech.org/IIF. So you can follow us there. We're going to have a blog, etc. So this is the beginning of what we're hoping to be a long-running, very big conversation with lots of different people and lots of different communities. I want to thank you all for coming and being present with us and bringing your good minds to share your thoughts about these sorts of things with us. We look forward to sharing with you more in the future. Very much want to thank our team. Erica and Guy Denoro and Mikkel, our research assistants who really made this thing go and made sure that everything was in place and that needed to be. I want to thank Stavanati for her work collaborating with me to make this sort of thing happen, as well as all the other people involved in the Initiative for Indigenous Futures. Thank you all.